The mansion was silent. Then, a scream. Have you ever looked at a celebrity and thought, they've got it all: fame, fortune, family, love? Now imagine peeling back the curtain on that perfect Hollywood life and finding blood-soaked floorboards, a hidden underground tunnel, and lifeless bodies sealed beneath concrete. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't fiction. This isn't a thriller directed by Rob Reiner. This is the final chapter of his life, and what investigators found in his mansion changed everything. So let's begin with a question that will haunt you for the rest of this story. What would make a daughter collapse to her knees, clutch her face, and scream so loud it echoed down the halls of a Brentwood estate, before even touching the phone to call 911? Because that's exactly what happened. And the reason wasn't just murder. It was discovery of something so twisted, so carefully buried, that even the LAPD was stunned into silence. Hollywood royalty, now a crime scene. Rob Reiner, 78 years old. Actor, director, activist. A man responsible for some of the most beloved films in American history: Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. A liberal icon, a storyteller, a proud father. At least, that's what the world believed. His wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, 70, a mother, a producer, known for her charity work and gentle smile. To the world, she was the calm to Rob's fire. They lived in a $13.5 million estate in Brentwood. Spanish Revival, private driveway, iron gate, security cameras, staff, housekeepers, drivers. But not one of them saw the horror coming. Not one of them suspected that on a quiet Sunday night in December, two of Hollywood's most respected figures would be stabbed to death in their own home. And even fewer could have imagined what came after the police arrived. What they found hidden beneath the mansion. Because the real story wasn't upstairs. It was underground. The 911 call that changed everything. At 8:41 p.m., the 911 dispatch logs a call from a young woman, frantic, hyperventilating. Her name, Romy Reiner, 27, the youngest of the Reiner children. A filmmaker in her own right. She'd come home to visit. Something felt off. The lights were on. The gate was open. The dogs weren't barking. Then, she saw them. Her parents. In the study. Blood. Everywhere. Her mother's body slumped over the armchair. Her father, face down, not breathing. She screamed. Not just once, but again and again. You can hear it on the call. The pain in her voice isn't just fear. It's betrayal. And just before the call drops, she says something no one expected. He lives here. He's here. And he told me this would happen. He said they deserved it. She wasn't talking about a stranger. She was talking about her brother, Nick Reiner, Hollywood's forgotten son. Nick Reiner, 32. To many, his name barely registers. But to those who knew the Reiner family well, Nick's story is one of missed potential, scandal, and dissent. Once a promising writer and screenwriter. But then came the drugs, the arrests, the rehab, the anger, the time he allegedly threatened a driver with a kitchen knife over a look. And then silence. He disappeared from public life. Moved into the guest house behind Rob and Michelle's mansion. The family claimed they were helping him heal. But what were they really hiding? Because that same night, less than 45 minutes after the 911 call, Nick was found alone in the guest house, muttering to himself, covered in dried blood. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He just said one sentence. You should check under the house. A tunnel, a hatch, a horror. At first, police thought it was metaphorical. Maybe a joke, a delusion. But when forensics teams swept the estate the next morning, they noticed something strange in the wine cellar. A hatch. Old, rusted, welded shut. But the floor around it? Recently disturbed. They cut it open. The air that rose from it wasn't just stale. It was foul, rancid, thick. What they found inside still hasn't been fully released to the public. But what's confirmed is this. There were 4 narrow beds made from plywood. There were personal belongings, bracelets, shoes, a baby's stuffed rabbit. There were bones. And in the corner, there was one woman, still alive. She was curled up, shivering, thin, pale. When medics lifted her out of the tunnel, she whispered one line. I was never supposed to leave. Let that settle for a moment. A woman, alive, beneath Rob Reiner's mansion, alongside bones, beds, items linked to missing persons cases, and not one neighbor ever suspected a thing. The public backlash, shock turns to silence. The news broke like an earthquake. Rob Reiner and wife stabbed in their home. But that was just the surface. As details emerged of the tunnel, the survivor, and Nick's arrest, Hollywood fell into a stunned hush. Celebrities deleted their tribute posts. Studios pulled Reiner's retrospective projects. Close friends offered no public comment. Why? Because the real fear wasn't about mourning Rob Reiner. It was about what else would come out. What else might have happened inside that mansion? Who else knew about the tunnel? And, perhaps most chillingly, how long had this been going on? The unanswered questions. Even now, investigators refuse to release full details. But here's what we know for sure. Nick Reiner has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The LAPD confirmed multiple unidentified human remains beneath the property. The woman found alive is linked to a missing persons case from 2006. Rob Reiner changed his will 48 hours before his death, cutting Nick out entirely. Surveillance footage from the house was deleted 30 minutes before the attack. And yet, there are whispers of something worse. Of a second tunnel. Of names in a journal found hidden in the walls. Of an unidentified third party who visited the mansion shortly before the murders and hasn't been seen since. Is this the work of a mentally unstable son? Or was Nick covering up something far more sinister? Could Rob Reiner himself have been complicit in what happened underground? Or was he trying to stop it? Why this story isn't over. You may think this is about a celebrity murder, but it's not. This is a story about what happens when power meets silence. When the legacy of Hollywood royalty becomes the perfect cover for unspeakable things. When a home filled with memories becomes a tomb of secrets. And if you think you've heard the most shocking part already, you haven't. Because what police found buried beneath the tunnel was something even darker. Something no one saw coming. And it changed the case forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The lights were still on when they died. That's what one investigator whispered to a reporter outside the gates of the Reiner estate, just barely picked up on a hot mic. And that sentence has haunted this case ever since. Why? Because it means someone wanted them to be seen. Someone wanted this death to make a statement. But to understand the full scope of what happened that night, we need to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the investigation. The beginning of the final 24 hours. The last calm before the chaos. Before screams. Before blood. Before the tunnel gave up its secrets. A Sunday that looked ordinary. The day began like any other in Brentwood, sunlight cascading through palm trees, quiet streets patrolled by security, humming Teslas gliding by multi-million-dollar mansions. Inside 1216 Barrington Way, Rob and Michelle Reiner's estate. Housekeeper Leticia Alvarez clocked in at 9 a.m. sharp. She said the mood was light. Michelle was humming in the kitchen, baking something cinnamon sweet. Rob was on a Zoom call, laughing with what she assumed was a studio executive. Nick Reiner, their 32-year-old son, was seen walking toward the pool area in sweatpants, headphones on, silent as a ghost. Leticia thought nothing of it. Just another Sunday in the mansion. What she didn't know? It would be the last morning she ever saw Rob or Michelle alive. 1:47 p.m., the first anomaly. At exactly 1:47 p.m., Michelle sent a text to her daughter, Romy. Coming by later? Your dad made chili. Nick's been quiet today. Nothing about that message was alarming on its own. But according to Romy, what stuck out was what Michelle didn't say. She always ended texts with XO or red heart. This one had nothing. No warmth. Just flat. Romy responded with a thumbs up and told her she'd swing by that evening. She would arrive too late. 3:10 p.m., a delivery that never made it in. Surveillance logs from the gate system show that Postmates arrived at the estate at 3:10 p.m. The driver, identified as Brandon, rang the bell. No answer. He left the food, sushi and a side of miso soup, on the porch. 2 hours later, when police reviewed the footage, the food was still there. Untouched. Why? If Rob and Michelle were alive at 3:10, why didn't they answer the door? Or were they already gone? Or worse, was someone watching through the windows, choosing not to answer? 4:30 p.m., the security footage gap. Now here's where things turn from strange to terrifying. The mansion had 14 security cameras. 8 exterior, 6 interior, all motion activated. stored on a private hard drive in the main office. The footage for the entire day was recovered. Until, at exactly 4:30 p.m., everything goes dark. Not one camera recorded anything between 4:30 and 6:50 p.m. No hallway movement. No door opening. No motion in the driveway. Just black. Then, at 6:51 p.m., the cameras switch back on. And the first frame? Rob Reiner walking through the front door. 5:05 p.m., the argument in the study. What happened in the blackout period? Well, we don't have the footage. But we do have a neighbor's account. Directly behind the Reiner estate is a property owned by a retired judge. His Ring doorbell picked up faint audio, mostly muffled. But one segment, enhanced by forensic audio technicians, is chilling. It's a male voice shouting, "You think this makes you better than me? After everything I buried for you." Then another voice, Rob's, calm but stern. "We're not afraid of you, Nick. You need help." Then silence. Then a loud bang, followed by what sounds like something shattering. That's all we have. But even in those 3 lines, a picture begins to form. Nick, rage boiling. Rob, standing firm. And between them, decades of silence, secrets, and something dark no one dared name. 6:18 p.m., Romy leaves her apartment. We know from her Uber receipt that Romy left her West Hollywood apartment at 6:18 p.m. She'd gotten her mother's text earlier. Had a weird feeling. She told her roommate, "Something's off today. I don't know why." She brought over a small gift, 2 framed photos from their last family vacation. She thought she was walking into a warm evening with chili, laughter, maybe a movie. Instead, 6:51 p.m., the front door opens. The camera flickers back to life. Romy pushes open the front door, holding the gift bag. She's seen calling out, "Mom? Dad?" No response. She walks in. The hallway light is on. Music is playing faintly, Rob's favorite jazz station. She steps toward the study. Then, as she stops, she sees something. Drops the bag. Backs up. One hand on her mouth. The screen freezes there. You can't see what she's seeing, but you can hear it. The scream. Not just fear. It's something else. Something primal. A scream that shatters the illusion of safety in that house forever. 7:02 p.m., the guest house discovery. By the time the police arrive, Romy is curled on the porch, sobbing. The front door is wide open. Officers enter, guns drawn. They find Rob and Michelle Reiner. Dead. Stab wounds. Rob on the floor. Michelle slumped over the armchair. But that's not the most chilling part. The guest house lights are on. Detective Natalie Morris checks it. She finds Nick Reiner on the couch. His shirt stained. His hands scratched. He looks calm. When she asks him what happened, he says nothing for 6 seconds. Then quietly mutters, "You should check under the house." 7:15 p.m., the wine cellar hatch. Police search the main residence. They sweep the first floor. Then the second. No signs of forced entry. No signs of robbery. But in the wine cellar, they find it. A square section of floor that sounds hollow when knocked. They tear it up. Beneath the wooden panel, a hatch, sealed with rusted nails, covered in dust. And yet, beneath it, there's a strange draft. A chill. A scent. Damp and metallic. They force it open. And inside, they see stairs. And this is where it all unravels. Because those stairs don't lead to a panic room. They don't lead to a bunker or forgotten basement. They lead to something constructed deliberately. Poured concrete. Reinforced walls. Power lines. Makeshift lighting. And beds. For beds. 2 of them, covered in dust and mold. 1 empty. And the last? Occupied. A woman. Eyes fluttering. Breathing shallow. When paramedics reach her, she whispers, "I was never supposed to leave." And tucked in her waistband, an ID badge. From 2006. From a wellness center in Northern California. Reported missing 16 years ago. She had been presumed dead. Until now. So, what really happened that night? Did Nick kill his parents out of rage? Did they uncover something they were never meant to see? Or were they trying to stop something and paid the price? Why did Rob change his will just 2 days earlier? Why did Nick, covered in blood, tell police to check beneath the house? And most terrifying of all, who else knew that tunnel was there? Because in Hollywood, secrets don't stay buried forever. But sometimes, the truth is hidden in concrete. And when police began digging, what they unearthed in the tunnel would force the investigation to explode in a direction no one could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. My mom's dead, my dad. There's blood everywhere. And he's still here. That's what came through the dispatcher's headset at precisely 6:57 p.m. on a call that would be replayed, transcribed, and dissected by police, lawyers, the media, and a public still struggling to accept the unthinkable. This wasn't a script. This wasn't a movie scene. This was real. And it was far more horrifying than anything Rob Reiner had ever put to film. The moment Romy walked into hell. Let's slow it down. She'd driven through the Brentwood gates thinking she was about to surprise her parents with a gift. 2 simple photo frames from their last family trip to Maui. She said later, "I hadn't seen them in a few weeks. I thought I'd just come by and eat with them. That's it." But as she walked up to the mansion, something felt wrong. The food delivery bag was still on the porch, untouched. That alone unsettled her. Her mother hated letting food sit out. The lights were on inside. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something sharper, coppery. She called out once. No answer. She stepped into the foyer. A framed family photo sat crooked on the side table. A wine glass shattered at the bottom of the stairs. Still silence. Then the music. A faint jazz melody playing from the study. Rob's favorite playlist. And that's when she walked in and saw them. The scene of a double murder. Michelle was in the armchair, head slumped unnaturally sideways. Blood soaked the sleeve of her white sweater. Rob was on the floor in front of her, collapsed face down, arms awkwardly twisted beneath his body. The room was cold, but the blood was fresh. And for one suspended moment, Romy didn't scream. She watched, almost like her brain couldn't comprehend it. Then the silence cracked. The scream that followed shook the house. The 911 call. A daughter's collapse caught on tape. 911. What is your emergency? My parents are dead. There's blood. There's so much blood. Please send someone. I think someone's still in the house. Ma'am, what's your name? Romy. Romy Reiner. Oh my God. Oh my God. My mom, her eyes are open. Stay on the line with me. Are you safe? No, I don't think I am. Is anyone else in the house? My brother. Nick. He's here. He's in the guest house. He told me they deserved it. Did he hurt them? He said it was the only way to keep them quiet. Static. Click. Call dropped. The silence that followed was deafening. Police dispatch scrambles to Brentwood. The call was logged as double homicide. Active threat. Within 6 minutes, the LAPD's Elite West Bureau Division had officers en route. By 7:09 p.m., patrol units surrounded the mansion. Helicopters circled overhead. The private gates were pulled open. And there, at the top of the steps, they found Romy, curled on the porch, eyes wide, shaking uncontrollably. Officer Sheila Curtis was first on the scene. She later said, she wasn't just traumatized. She was shattered. Something about her body language, like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The first officer inside. When Curtis entered the home, gun drawn, she followed the trail Romy had described. Wine glass on the floor. Bloody handprint on the doorframe of the study. Overturned photo frames. A strong, metallic scent in the air. She stopped in the study doorway. And there, it was all exactly as Romy described. 2 bodies. No movement. Stab wounds. Blood. But what stunned Curtis more? Michelle's eyes were open, frozen in fear, looking up at something. But what? Romy's recollection, a fragmented memory. In interviews conducted later, after hours of sleep, sedatives, and sobs, Romy tried to piece together her thoughts from that moment. She said, it was like the room didn't belong to us anymore, like it had been claimed by something else. She remembered thinking the walls felt closer, the windows darker. She said she felt like someone was still watching her. And most disturbingly, she said this. My mom always locked that door, the one to the wine cellar. That night, it was open. The wine cellar door, always locked, now ajar. For years, the Reiner estate's wine cellar had been a joke in the family. Rob called it Dad's Cave. Michelle hated it, said it made the house feel cold. It had a solid steel door with a custom key lock. Not electronic, not digital, old-fashioned, and always locked. But when officers walked past the hallway to the cellar, they noticed the door was slightly open. And that was the second time that night the same eerie sentence echoed in an officer's mind. You should check under the house. Nick's calm reaction, while Romy collapsed and sobbed on the porch. Nick was sitting on a couch in the guest house. He was barefoot. His shirt was stained. His hands were bandaged, poorly, when Detective Natalie Morris entered and asked if he knew what happened. He didn't panic. He didn't ask where his parents were. He just said, "They never should have opened that door." Morris asked what he meant. Nick looked up, eyes empty, and said, "It was only a matter of time. They always thought they were above it. But we all pay eventually." Forensics flood the scene. Over the next 3 hours, the Reiner estate transformed from a celebrity residence to a full-blown crime scene command center. Search teams went room by room. Photographers cataloged every object. Blood spatter analysts traced the direction and velocity of the attacks. Technicians sealed off the guest house. And one team headed straight for the wine cellar. What they found would take this case into national headlines overnight. But even before they opened the hatch, something felt off. Detective Morris reported an intense odor leaking from the cellar, rotting, damp, and organic. One officer vomited after the hatch was opened. Another whispered, "This isn't a murder scene. It's AF ****ing tomb." The woman in the tunnel. You've already heard the basics. There was a tunnel. There were 4 beds. There were bones. And there was one survivor. But here's what you didn't know. She was chained. A rusted steel cuff on her ankle. Fresh blood. Scars. She'd been down there for years. They asked her name. She mumbled, barely audible, "Emily." Romy's scream echoes beyond the mansion. When news broke the next morning, Romy's voice was everywhere. The audio of her 911 call had leaked. TMZ, Daily Mail, even cable news. Millions heard the crack in her voice. The horror, the betrayal. Some online called her brave. Others questioned her motives. But no one could argue this. Her call saved a life. And it may have exposed one of the most disturbing secrets Hollywood has ever buried. But what did Nick mean? We all pay eventually. Was it guilt? A confession? Or was he talking about something bigger? Was this murder a moment of personal revenge? Or was it part of something older? Something the Reiners had kept hidden beneath their empire of fame and fortune? Because as the investigation deepened, and the names linked to that tunnel began to leak, one thing became horrifyingly clear. Romy's call didn't just alert police to a double homicide. It blew open the first door of a house built on secrets. And the next door would lead to a set of tapes. Tapes Rob Reiner never wanted anyone to see. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the person everyone stopped worrying about was the one they should have feared the most? That question sits at the center of this chapter. Because the night Rob and Michelle Reiner died, police didn't just arrest a son. They uncovered a double life. And the deeper they dug into Nick Reiner's past, the harder it became to tell where trauma ended and something far darker began. Nick Reiner wasn't always the problem child. In fact, for most of his early life, he was the invisible one. Not the golden child. Not the rebellious headline maker. Just there. Growing up in the shadow of a Hollywood giant does something to a kid. Especially when that giant is beloved by millions, praised for empathy, celebrated for moral clarity on screen. Imagine sitting at a dinner table where strangers praise your father's humanity, while never once asking how yours is holding up. Nick was quiet as a boy. Teachers described him as intelligent but withdrawn. He wrote obsessively. Short stories, screenplays, dark, symbolic pieces that classmates found unsettling but compelling. One teacher later recalled a line from a high school assignment Nick turned in. "I live in a house with many rooms, but I'm not allowed to open all of them." At the time, no one thought much of it. They should have. The early cracks. Nick's 20s were supposed to be his launchpad. Industry introductions. Studio lunches. Mentorship from writers who owed Rob favors. Doors opened without him knocking. But something kept going wrong. Scripts left unfinished. Meetings missed. Sudden disappearances. Then the drugs. At first, it was framed as experimentation. Then burnout. Then a rough patch. Behind closed doors, the reality was uglier. Nick was arrested twice in his mid-20s. Both incidents quietly handled. Records sealed. No headlines. One involved a confrontation outside a bar. Another involved a wellness center where he allegedly threatened staff after refusing medication. Each time, Rob stepped in. Lawyers called. Donations made. Silence purchased. And each time, Nick returned home angrier. More withdrawn. More convinced that the world and his parents were hiding something from him. The guest house years. By the time Nick moved into the guest house behind the main mansion, the family framed it as support. He needs space. He's healing. He's getting help. But staff members told a different story. The guest house became a fortress. Curtains always drawn. Locks added. Furniture rearranged obsessively. One groundskeeper said Nick would spend hours pacing the perimeter fence at night, muttering to himself, stopping suddenly to stare at the main house like he was counting windows. Another said he was forbidden from going near the wine cellar. Nick told me that door was cursed, the groundskeeper said. He said bad things lived under it. The journals. When police searched the guest house after the murders, they expected weapons, drugs, blood. They found those. But what disturbed investigators most were the notebooks. Dozens of them. Every surface covered in cramped handwriting. Some neat, some frantic, some barely legible. One phrase appeared again and again. They keep pretending it never happened. Another page read, "They made a deal. I didn't agree to it. I was just a kid." And then, over and over, written darker, heavier, almost carved into the paper. The tunnel remembers. What tunnel? Police didn't yet know. But Nick clearly did. The night before, cell phone records show Nick tried calling his mother 3 times the night before the murders. No answer. He left one voicemail. It was recovered later. His voice wasn't angry. It was calm. Too calm. "I know you think you handled it," he said. "But you didn't. You just buried it. And you buried me with it." Investigators flagged the message immediately. What did he think his parents had buried? And why did he sound like someone who had already made a decision? Contradictions everywhere. Here's where the story fractures. On the surface, Nick looked like the obvious suspect. He lived on the property. He had a documented history of instability. He was found with blood on him. He made incriminating statements. But then came the contradictions. No defensive wounds on Nick. No blood trail leading from the study to the guest house. And most unsettling of all, Nick's fingerprints were not on the murder weapon. Instead, they were found on the wine cellar door. Fresh, as if he'd opened it recently, or tried to close it. Nick's interrogation. During questioning, Nick didn't deny being angry. He didn't deny screaming. But when detectives asked him directly if he killed his parents, he laughed. A short, hollow laugh. "You think this was about rage?" he asked. "This was about panic." "Panic from who?" Nick leaned forward. "They found something. And once you see it, you don't get to pretend anymore." Detectives pressed him. "What did they find?" Nick's face changed, and for the first time, he looked afraid. The childhood memory Nick couldn't escape. A suppressed memory resurfaced during a psychiatric evaluation ordered after his arrest. Nick described being 8 years old, standing in the wine cellar hallway, hearing voices beneath the floor. Not arguing voices, crying voices. When he told his mother, she knelt down, took his face in her hands, and said something he never forgot. "Some doors are locked to protect people. You understand that, right?" Nick said he nodded, but he never understood who was being protected. The will. Then came the will. Rob Reiner had updated it 48 hours before his death. Nick was cut out completely. Not reduced. Not conditional. Removed. When detectives confronted Nick with this, his response stunned them. He smiled. "So they finally chose," he said. "Chose what?" "Silence," Nick replied. "They always choose silence." The double life exposed. To the public, Nick Reiner was a troubled adult child spiraling out. To investigators, he was becoming something else entirely. A witness? A conspirator? A scapegoat? Or a man who knew too much and finally snapped under the weight of it? Because the more police learned about Nick's past, the clearer it became. His breakdowns didn't start with drugs. They started with knowledge. Knowledge no one else wanted exposed. And as forensic teams continued processing the tunnel beneath the mansion, they found evidence that suggested Nick wasn't the only one who knew it existed. Not by a long shot. But the most devastating revelation was still ahead. Because hidden inside one of Nick's journals was a name. A name that did not belong to a victim. A name that did not belong to a suspect. A name that would pull this case into a far deeper, far more dangerous direction. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. They searched his room for weapons. They didn't expect to find a second door. When officers first entered Nick Reiner's guest house on the night of the murders, they thought they were walking into the end of a tragedy. In reality, They were stepping into the origin story of something far more disturbing. Because what they discovered in that small, seemingly ordinary space behind the mansion wasn't just a young man's isolation. It was a deliberately concealed chamber, hidden behind drywall, filled with objects that told a story no one was prepared for. The illusion of normalcy. On the surface, the guest house was mundane. A single bed, half-eaten takeout, prescription bottles for anxiety and antipsychotics, stacks of screenplay drafts, unproduced, uncredited. The closet was filled with mismatched clothes and a box labeled Truth in black Sharpie. That box contained exactly what you'd expect. Printouts of conspiracy forums, scribbled rants, torn magazine clippings, easy to dismiss. Except for one thing. The floor beneath the box had been scratched badly, as if something heavy had been dragged across it, or someone had tried to move it frequently. When officers shifted the furniture, they noticed a portion of the wall that didn't echo like the rest. It was thicker, sound-deadened, reinforced, and sealed. They were no longer in a guest house. They were at the entrance to something buried intentionally. The secret room. It took a tactical unit 2 hours to breach the wall. Behind it, a windowless space, roughly the size of a walk-in closet. No ventilation, no lights, no furniture, but not empty. In the middle of the floor, a pile of burned papers, still smoldering. To one side, a half-melted flash drive, and pinned to the far wall, nearly 30 photographs, arranged in a grid, all of them of women. Some were headshots. Others were candid, blurry. Most had no names. Except one, Emily, the same woman who had been found chained in the tunnel. The photos, a pattern emerges. Every photo had something in common. The women were all in their 20s or 30s. Most had last been seen in or around Los Angeles. A handful were actresses. A few were former staffers, assistants, nannies, interns. Police began matching faces with cold case files. Within 24 hours, 7 were confirmed to be women listed as missing persons over the past 15 years. One, shockingly, had last been seen attending a private fundraiser hosted by Rob Reiner himself. Another had applied to intern at Castle Rock Entertainment, the production company Reiner co-founded. Were these women connected by circumstance or by something far more deliberate? The half-melted flash drive. Forensics recovered fragments from the flash drive found in the room. Though most of it was corrupted, a handful of video files were partially restored. They were grainy. No timestamps. No sound. But they showed one thing clearly. A corridor made of concrete, lit by a swinging bulb. Each video showed different angles of the same space. And in one frame, just before the footage cut to static, a figure walks by. A man. Too blurry to ID. But the build, the posture, resembled Nick. Only one problem. According to Romy's sworn testimony, Nick didn't have the key to the tunnel. Her father did. The burned pages. The papers in the center of the floor had been set alight recently. Police reconstructed as much as they could. One page stood out. It was a journal entry, written in flowing cursive, clearly not Nick's handwriting. It read, "They think I'm safe out here. That I've forgotten what I saw when I was 13. But I remember the trapdoor. I remember what was in it. And I remember the man who told me to never speak of it again." R.R. Rob Reiner? Was this his private journal? Or was it forged? Either way, the implications were horrifying. The hidden door that shouldn't exist. Even more unsettling, while mapping the guest house blueprints, an architect consulting with the investigation noticed something that sent chills down the team's spine. The secret room wasn't part of the original property plan. In fact, there was no record of that wall ever being installed. According to construction permits, the guest house should have had a sunroom in that space. But city records showed the sunroom had been removed during renovations in 2009, the same year Nick returned from his second stint in rehab. And the contractor who filed the renovation paperwork was found dead in 2013 under suspicious circumstances. Case still open. A diary page from Michelle. In the debris, one more artifact surfaced. A torn corner from what looked like a diary. Just 5 lines. Written in delicate, looping script. He doesn't sleep anymore. He stands in the hallway, staring at the cellar. Last night he asked me who they were. I told him to go back to bed. But he didn't move. He just whispered, "I remember now." Police believe the handwriting belonged to Michelle Reiner. And the he? Almost certainly Nick. But who were they? And what exactly did Nick remember? Was Nick building a case? Or covering his tracks? Here's the contradiction that shook detectives to the core. If Nick was guilty, why document everything? Why collect photos, build timelines, write manic annotations? Why include evidence that clearly tied him to the women? Unless he wasn't building an alibi. He was building a warning, a record of something he believed was going to happen again, or something that had never really stopped. The chilling detail on the photographs. A forensic tech noticed something odd about the photo grid on the wall. Behind one of the photos, a young woman with dark hair, smiling nervously, was a handwritten note taped to the wall. It read, "She saw the crawl space. She asked too many questions. Don't let her be next." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting didn't match Nick's. And the ink used? Matched a fountain pen found in Rob Reiner's study. So what was the guest house really? Was it a sanctuary for a disturbed son? A mental prison? Or was it a staging ground for something far more sinister? One officer described it as a curated mind map of guilt, rage, and warning. But even with all this evidence, photos, recordings, diary fragments, one thing remained missing: the connection between Nick, the tunnel, and his parents' murder. Until police found what was behind the other hidden panel. Yes, there was another one. One final compartment behind a false baseboard. Inside, a cassette tape, a vintage recorder, and a note, written in neat block letters. If you're hearing this, I'm probably dead. And if Nick didn't kill me, ask yourself why someone wanted you to think he did. The tape? It contained a voice that investigators recognized immediately. Rob Reiner. His final recording. His confession. And it would change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. This isn't a wine cellar, it's a doorway. And we just opened it. That's what one officer whispered as the first responders pried open the rusted hatch at the base of the Reiner estate's wine cellar. The moment the hinges gave way, the air changed. The temperature dropped. The lights above flickered. No one spoke, not out of professionalism, but because something in that hatch felt wrong. And what they found beneath the Reiner mansion wasn't a panic room. It wasn't a bomb shelter. It was a purpose-built tunnel. Engineered, reinforced, and deep. So the question is, why did it exist? Who built it? And more importantly, who was supposed to stay down there? The trapdoor, rusted shut, but recently touched. The hatch itself was disguised beneath an ornate wooden cabinet, wedged into the far corner of the wine cellar. At first glance, it looked like it hadn't been touched in years, covered in dust, aged wood, a broken lock. But forensics revealed something different. Fresh smudge marks on the edges. Fingerprints near the corners. And under ultraviolet light, blood. It hadn't been sealed for decades. It had been sealed just days ago. And whoever sealed it knew exactly what they were doing. The descent begins. Beneath the hatch, a narrow metal staircase led down into darkness. No signs of cobwebs. No rodents. Nothing abandoned. This wasn't an old tunnel. This was maintained. The walls were concrete, not brick. The floor was smooth, poured, and damp. Conduits ran along the ceiling. Electrical lines, meaning this place had power. Officers descended slowly, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through stale air. And then they saw it. A narrow corridor, barely wide enough to walk shoulder to shoulder, lined with steel doors. For on each side, each labeled with a Roman numeral, 1, 2, 3, 4. Every door had a bolt on the outside. Let that sink in. The rooms inside. Each chamber was a different shade of horror. Room I. A child's mattress. A rusted bucket. Scratches on the walls. Dozens of tally marks, counting days, weeks, years. Room 2. A mirror shattered on the floor. Nails sticking out from the walls. A single white shoe, bloodstained. Room 3. Posters taped up. Actors, singers, childhood celebrities. But all of them defaced. Eyes scratched out. Mouths torn off. And then, Room 4. Occupied. The survivor. She was curled in the far corner, wrapped in a blanket that hadn't been washed in years. Her skin pale. Her body thin. Her eyes alert. At first, officers thought she was dead. Then, she opened her mouth and whispered, "Don't let him know I'm out." Paramedics rushed in. The woman was identified as Emily Vasquez, age 29. Last seen in 2006. She had been listed as a missing person after leaving a psychiatric facility following a voluntary discharge. No leads. No trace. Until now. She'd been underground for nearly 19 years. And when they asked who had taken her, she didn't hesitate. The man from the house. The one they all called Director. The tunnel's construction timeline. Engineers were brought in to evaluate the tunnel. They were stunned. The work was precise, structurally sound, not amateur. Based on concrete curing patterns and rebar corrosion, the tunnel was estimated to be constructed between 1999 and 2004. During this time, Rob Reiner was at the height of his Hollywood clout, producing, directing, campaigning, and, apparently, building beneath his home. But here's where it gets stranger. City records show no permits for underground excavation, no geological surveys, no contractor filings. And when they ran the tunnel's specs through construction company databases, not a single local firm matched the engineering signature. So who built it? One forensic architect offered a theory. This was military-grade work. Someone with access to classified engineering methods. Someone who wanted it to last and to disappear. The exit door that was bricked shut. At the far end of the corridor, beyond the 4 rooms, officers found a second door. It was different. Older. Wooden. Thick. It led to a set of stairs going up, not down. And halfway up that staircase, bricks. A wall had been sealed over what appeared to be a second exit, one that would have opened into the garden behind the estate. The bricks were new. The mortar hadn't even fully cured. They were less than a week old. Who sealed that exit? And why? Had someone tried to trap something inside, or prevent someone from getting out? Evidence left behind. Inside the corridor, crime scene units found 2 empty Ford drip bags, faded Polaroid photos of at least 6 different women, a journal, pages torn out, scraps of women's clothing, a roll of duct tape, dried with age, hair, bound with a gold ribbon. Each piece painted a picture, not just of captivity, but of pattern. This wasn't a one-time incident. This tunnel had been used. For how long? And for what purpose? That question shook detectives. Because if Emily Vasquez was the only known survivor, how many others had been kept there? Emily's first full sentence. After stabilizing at UCLA Medical Center, Emily spoke to a trauma nurse. Her voice was low, but clear. He said I was lucky, that I got the room with the mirror. She paused, then added, the others didn't get mirrors, because they weren't allowed to see what they'd become. The nurse asked her who he was. Emily replied, he said I could call him the director. But his real name was Nick. But was it Nick? When shown a photo of Nick Reiner, Emily hesitated. It looks like him. But he was older, bigger. His voice was different. I don't know. And then, sometimes he'd bring food. But other times, it was someone else. Someone with gloves. Investigators began to suspect what Nick had claimed all along. That he wasn't alone. That someone else was using the tunnel. That someone else was in control. And the final piece of evidence confirmed it. The electrical panel. Behind a locked cabinet at the far end of the tunnel, crime scene investigators discovered a circuit breaker box. It controlled lights for each of the 4 rooms. A hidden camera system, no recordings found. A speaker system wired into the ceilings. Which means someone could speak to the victims remotely. Watch them. Control what they saw. What they heard. What they believed. This wasn't just confinement. It was programming. A psychological experiment? A delusional fantasy? Or something else? Back to the top. Who had access? Now the question became, who had keys to the wine cellar? Romy said her father was the only one who ever kept a key. A master key was recovered from Rob Reiner's personal study drawer. But forensic swabbing of the key revealed 2 sets of DNA. Rob Reiner's and someone else's. The second sample? Still being tested. But early results suggested a female. Was there a third party involved? Or was someone close to Rob using the key without him knowing? Or worse, with his blessing? And then came the skeleton. Just before the search teams cleared the tunnel, one final discovery was made. Beneath a loose section of concrete in room 3, a skeletal hand. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Marla Jensen, 26. Missing since 2012. She had applied for a job as a production assistant at Castle Rock Entertainment. And her last known location? A private event at the Reiner estate. So why build this? Why hide it? Why now? Was this Rob's doing? Nick's? Or were they both part of something far darker? And why did Nick say, check under the house? Was it guilt? Or was it his way of trying to end it? The Reiners are gone, but the tunnel they left behind is very much real. And when investigators ran a second scan beneath the property, they detected another chamber, not yet opened. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. In this town, your sins don't vanish. They just get written into someone else's script. When Rob Reiner's name first flashed across headlines, murdered, bloodied, found dead in his own home, most people reacted with shock. But a smaller, quieter group inside Hollywood didn't blink. They didn't post tributes. They didn't tweet condolences. They didn't show up at the candlelight vigil outside the Brentwood mansion. They went silent. Why? Because for decades, Rob Reiner wasn't just the man behind When Harry Met Sally or A Few Good Men. He was a gatekeeper, a dealmaker, a man with the kind of pull that could make or break a career with one phone call. But power always comes with a price. And as the investigation into his murder deepened, a new theory emerged. Rob hadn't just discovered the tunnel beneath his home. He had built it. And then, when things went too far, he tried to bury it. Not just physically, but from memory. And from history, back to the blueprints. The 1998 renovation that changed everything. When Rob Reiner purchased the Brentwood estate in 1997, it was already luxurious. A 4-bedroom Spanish revival with ornate woodwork and sprawling gardens. But within a year, he filed permits for a full-scale renovation. On paper, the changes seemed normal. Reinforced foundation, new HVAC system, expanded wine cellar, subterranean entertainment space. That last part? Vague. Unusual. Especially because no blueprints for that addition were ever submitted. The contractor listed on the permit? Deceased. And when forensic architects examined the construction materials used in the tunnel system, they found batch numbers tied to a now-defunct military subcontractor. Someone went to great lengths to make this tunnel invisible. Which begs the question, was Rob hiding something? Or protecting someone? The memoir that was never published. After Rob's death, his attorney delivered a sealed box to authorities. Inside, a manuscript titled Director's Cut, The Untold Life of Rob Reiner. A torn envelope addressed to Nick. And a post-it note, burn this if I don't. The manuscript was incomplete, rambling at times, but chillingly revealing. One section stood out. There are things I did in the name of loyalty. Loyalty to friends, to secrets, to people whose careers I helped launch. I kept my mouth shut. I kept the door locked. But silence is its own kind of violence. And now it's coming for me. That line alone shifted the tone of the investigation. Because if Rob had kept the tunnel locked, who had the key? And what exactly had he been silent about? The private guest list no one wanted released. Detectives discovered an old event planning calendar in Michelle Reiner's email archive. It contained a list labeled, Private Guests, Do Not Send to Staff. Names on that list included a former Oscar-winning director now facing abuse allegations, a well-known billionaire tech investor, a powerful network executive accused of silencing accusers, several women with no last names, only first names and phone numbers. What were these people doing in the Reiner mansion? And why were their visits kept off the record? More importantly, did they know about the tunnel? Were they guests? Or participants? The staff who spoke and then vanished. 2 former staffers, both employed during the early 2000s, were tracked down by private investigators working the case. One, a former maid named Carla, agreed to a single off-record phone call. Here's what she said. I clean that wine cellar every week. But there was always one door I wasn't allowed to touch. He told me, if you ever open that, you're fired. The he wasn't Rob. She refused to name him. But he was always around, always watching, even when Rob was out of town. The second staffer, a gardener named Luis, agreed to meet. He never showed. Days later, he was reported missing by his sister in Long Beach. Gone. No trace. Coincidence? Or something darker? The therapist's notes. Rob knew more than he admitted. In a rare legal move, police obtained permission to review notes from Rob's longtime therapist, Dr. Evelyn Langston. Here's an excerpt from a 2021 session. He fears the past catching up, feels trapped by loyalty, repeats the phrase. I sealed it, but he opened it again. Another line, dated 6 months before his death. Client expresses guilt over a door I built to keep something in, not to keep people out. Dr. Langston confirmed Rob had been suffering from anxiety, paranoia, and recurring nightmares involving underground spaces. She said he often ended their sessions with the same question. What if locking the door was the real sin? The rumored pact among power players. Hollywood has always had its whispers, rumors, scandals, secrets. But a pattern began to emerge in the wake of the tunnel's discovery. Several other high-profile figures, all known friends or colleagues of Rob, suddenly lawyered up. A-list producers canceled public appearances. Executives scrubbed past social media ties to the Reiner family. One retired actor, once close with Rob, fled the country within 48 hours of the news breaking. This wasn't just about one man. This was about a circle, a secret that many had protected. And as one anonymous studio insider put it, that tunnel was never about escape. It was about control, about owning people, physically, psychologically, completely. But then, why seal it? If Rob was part of this darkness, why seal the tunnel? Why change his will? Why leave behind recordings? Some believe Rob had a change of heart in his later years. That guilt finally overwhelmed him. That watching Nick spiral, watching his family crumble, made him realize the monster he'd helped build now lived in his own house. Others argue he was preparing to go public. The unfinished memoir, the legal arrangements, the silent removal of names from guest lists. But he didn't act fast enough, because someone got to him first, and that someone knew where the other key was hidden. Romy's forgotten memory. In a quiet moment after the chaos, Romy shared something chilling with detectives. I remember being little, maybe 6 or 7. I snuck down into the cellar. I wanted to see the grown-up wine. But there was this noise, like a girl crying, and a man's voice saying, "Shoo, quiet. You'll be out soon." I told my dad. He knelt down and said, "That part of the house isn't for us, baby. You stay in the light, okay? Stay in the light." A poetic warning, or a deliberate instruction to ignore the shadows. Either way, the tunnel didn't forget. The note Rob left in the wall. Behind a loose panel in the study, investigators found a handwritten letter, unsigned, unaddressed. But the handwriting matched other samples from Rob. It read, "If you're reading this, then everything is already broken." I tried to close the door. I did, but I opened it once. And the thing about doors is, once they exist, someone will always find the key again. I wasn't strong enough to tell the truth. I hope my children are. So what was Rob Reiner's legacy? Was he a loving father who made a horrific mistake and tried to atone? Or was he a monster in denial, quietly facilitating a nightmare while hiding behind prestige? The truth may be somewhere in between. What we know is this. He built the tunnel. He kept the key. He wrote things down. And when his time came, he wasn't screaming. He wasn't fighting. He was sitting, waiting, like a man who knew the past had finally reached him. But what came next wasn't a secret Rob could bury, because the tapes were about to surface. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. He poured the wine, then locked the cellar. And he never, ever locked the cellar. That was the first thing Ernesto Morales told investigators. For 22 years, he served the Reiner household. He saw the family through highs, lows, premieres, birthdays, and quiet Sundays. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every scent in the kitchen, every silence that meant something was very wrong. But on the night Rob and Michelle Reiner were murdered, Ernesto saw something that wouldn't let him sleep again. And what he revealed behind closed doors, after requesting full immunity and anonymity, shattered the timeline of the case wide open. A witness hidden in plain sight. Ernesto wasn't just the butler. He was the family shadow. Trusted, discreet, loyal. He arrived at 10 a.m. that Sunday and left around 7 p.m., or so he told authorities initially. But what he confessed later was that he'd stayed longer. Not out of duty, out of fear. Because something about that day felt off. Different. Wrong. The breakfast tension. Normally, breakfast was quiet, Ernesto recalled. Michelle would sit by the window. Rob would be in his robe, reading the Times. But that morning, Nick was already in the dining room, dressed, awake, watching. No food, just sitting in silence. When Rob entered, Ernesto noticed Rob's face tighten, just slightly. A forced smile. A quick glance. Michelle, always the peacekeeper, placed a hand on Rob's shoulder and whispered, "He's trying." But Ernesto could tell, Rob didn't believe that. The cellar incident. Around 1 p.m., Ernesto was polishing silverware in the kitchen when he heard a sharp metallic click from the wine cellar hall. That click, the sound of the lock being turned. He turned the corner and saw Rob standing in front of the cellar door, holding the old brass key. His hand trembled slightly as he locked the door and slipped the key into his breast pocket. Rob looked up and saw Ernesto watching. And that's when he said it. Not today. He didn't explain. He just walked away. And in 22 years, Ernesto had never once seen Rob lock that door during the day. Nick's outburst. Later that afternoon, Ernesto brought a tray of tea to the study. Nick was already there. The tension in the room was unbearable. Rob was pacing. Michelle was seated, visibly nervous. Nick was shaking his head, jaw clenched. Ernesto tried to place the tray down, but Nick snapped. Not now. This is family business. Rob turned and nodded at Ernesto, silently dismissing him. But as Ernesto turned to leave, he heard Nick say one more thing. You think locking it makes you innocent? Ernesto paused. His spine stiffened. Rob didn't answer. The hidden cameras. Ernesto had always known the estate had cameras. He helped install them. But in the last year, he noticed something odd. Someone had added 2 new cameras, without his knowledge. One pointed directly at the wine cellar hallway. The other? Hidden behind a decorative panel facing the main staircase. When he asked Rob about it weeks earlier, Rob deflected. Just trying to keep things safe, he said. With everything going on, you can't be too careful. But Ernesto didn't believe him. Especially after discovering that those new feeds weren't connected to the main home system. They were being routed to a separate, encrypted DVR. One Ernesto couldn't access. The night in question. Despite telling the police he left at 7 p.m., Ernesto later admitted to staying late. He'd forgotten to iron Rob's favorite shirt for an upcoming event. He returned quietly through the side entrance. No one saw him. That's when he heard shouting coming from the study. He stayed back, hidden. He heard Rob say, You think this will end with me? You're wrong. It will follow you. Nick shouted back. Then I'll take it with me. Glass shattered. Then silence. Then Michelle's voice. Stop it. Both of you. This ends tonight. Ernesto slipped back out the door. He never told anyone. Not until now. Why stay silent? When asked why he didn't come forward immediately, Ernesto's voice broke. Because I was afraid. Not of Nick. Of what I knew Rob was trying to bury. He said he'd seen too much. He remembered 2004, when a young woman showed up at the estate crying. She said she worked for one of Rob's friends. She begged for Michelle. She was never seen again. That same week, Ernesto said, the floor in the wine cellar was repaired. And when he asked Rob about it, there was no smile, no kindness, just a look I'd never seen before, like I'd opened the wrong door. Ernesto's breaking point. It wasn't until the tunnel survivor, Emily, was rescued that Ernesto reached out to the authorities. He said he recognized her, not by name, but by voice. I used to hear her singing. Through the floor, he said. I thought I was going mad. He wasn't. He was hearing her from the rooms beneath the house. And then came the most devastating moment of his testimony. The hidden key. Ernesto confessed that 2 months before the murder, he found a duplicate key to the wine cellar in the laundry room. He took it, and one night, after the Reiners left for a weekend retreat, he opened the door. He went down the stairs. What he saw changed him forever. He didn't describe it in detail. He just said, no one would believe me. Not if I said it. Not if I screamed it from a rooftop. They'd call me crazy. They'd call me a liar. Because it wasn't just a tunnel. It was a lie built into concrete. He said he sealed the door behind him and swore never to open it again. Until Nick did. Final words before disappearing. Ernesto provided everything to investigators. His statement, his key, his timeline. But days later, when officers returned to clarify a few final questions, he was gone. No note, no forwarding address. His bank account was emptied, and his phone pinged once, near the Mexican border. And then, nothing. As if he vanished into the very shadows he once served. So what did Ernesto really know? Was he protecting Rob all those years? Was he blackmailed? Complicit? Or was he the only person in that house who understood the full scope of the nightmare beneath it? We may never know. But one thing is certain. The night Ernesto heard Nick say, I'll take it with me, he wasn't talking about guilt. He was talking about evidence. Because in the days after the murders, police discovered something hidden in Nick's possession. A memory card. Encrypted. Labeled only with one word. Director. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. My mom's dead, my dad. There's blood everywhere. And he's still here. That's what came through the dispatcher's headset at precisely 6:57 p.m. on a call that would be replayed, transcribed, and dissected by police, lawyers, the media, and a public still struggling to accept the unthinkable. This wasn't a script. This wasn't a movie scene.